Welcome to another episode of My Wakeup Call. This is the podcast where I find out a little bit about my guest and then save finding out a lot more about them for the podcast. Now, you, our listeners, know about my opening spiel, but my guests don't. And it's about finding out what they're up to, what matters most to them, and how that came to matter to them. What was their journey? What were their wake-up calls? And as you, our listeners, know, I also am very curious about people's origin story because that shapes a lot of who we become or who we don't want to become. So I'm very pleased to have Dr. Charryse Johnson on. She's a veteran psychotherapist and mindfulness practitioner whose work focuses on the intersection of trauma, somatic integration, spirituality, and social justice. She's the founder of Jade Integrative Counseling and Wellness, an integrative therapy practice where personal values, the search for meaning, and the power of choice are her central focus. She has a BA in Human Development and Family Studies, an MA in Professional Counseling, and a PhD in Counseling Psychology with a concentration in crisis and trauma. And I hope we'll talk about that because, Charryse, I have one of my focus areas is crisis and trauma. One of my books was PTSD for Dummies.
Oh, so good. So good.
Yep. So welcome.
Thank
Welcome.
you. Happy to be here.
Well, we're happy to have you. And I will ask you what I ask everybody. So even though I've introduced you in your bio, if you were to step back and be reflective and just fill in the blank, what I think matters most to me beyond my family is what?
What I think matters most to me beyond my family is honoring the space that I was designed to occupy. And that's a space that has developed and formed over time, much like you were talking about in the opening, has come about from different experiences that I've had in life where this is who I was in order to survive. And then as I healed, learning more about who I was in nature and how I'm now taking up space and wanting to do something powerful with that space and really just using my own life stories along with my education to help other people know better is possible. And regardless of what you've been through, you can always move forward in some way if you're willing to do the hard work because it's not easy. Let's say that it's not easy, but it's worth it, in my opinion.
So unpack the honoring the space. That was a fascinating way to describe it. Can you say more about that? And then you did mention something about uh, having to survive various things and then
Mhm,
getting beyond that.
mhm.
And so fill us in on any and all of that.
Yeah, that's a mouthful. How much time do we have? I would say, as a young child, my father didn't go to school past seventh grade. He was actually an indigenous individual born in the middle of a cotton field. So his mother was indigenous and his father was a freed slave to start. That gives some context. And then my mother came from a very highly spiritual, faith-based family, and these two beautiful souls collided, but very contradicting beliefs about things. At a very young age, one of my biggest wake up calls, I don't know that I knew it was a wake up call then, but over time, I realized the magnitude of the decision that I made was having interaction with my father. My parents separated when I was 5. And this was during a season where if your parents separated, you were seen as dysfunctional. I remember sitting in class and having teachers say, well, she comes from a broken home, so keep your eye on her. There was no reason. I had given no cause for concern, but just because that knowledge was known. And I remember how irritated and overwhelmed and frustrated I was by the stigma of my identity starting to be cast verbally by something that was completely out of my control. And it infuriated me as a child, and it still gets to me as an adult. But fast forward, having an interaction with my father and my mother, I will give her so much credit, never talked bad about him. She always kind of made the decision that she needed to make and allowed myself and all of my siblings to identify what we wanted our relationship to be with him. And there's a big gap between me and my siblings. So there's me, and then there's 7, 8, and 9 years older than I am. But on my 10th birthday, I was super excited to see him after 5 years of them separating and no contact. And throughout that time, we had an encounter together where his desire for me wasn't the same as my desire for myself. He was very focused on doing some things that were illegal and not healthy. But to make a long story short, I made a decision that if I wanted to be healthy and not walk through life hurt by the abandonment and the rejection and the lack of love, I would have to cut off the relationship with my father. And so came home after that experience and told my mom, unless you see some reason otherwise, I really need to pause on connecting with him because the level of pain and hurt, and I'm saying this as an adult, but as a child, it was basically, I don't think it will be good for me to be in connection with him anymore. I feel uncomfortable. I don't feel safe. And that's not something that I want to experience. And that was honored, which I'm very thankful. But there's a lot of ramifications to growing up without a father, without having a visual picture of what it means to have a healthy relationship, even down to knowing life with two incomes and what that was like for our family and having to move. I went to a different school every year until high school. And then when I got to high school, that was the time where I said, Mom, I'm gonna need recommendations from teachers. So whatever it takes, we have to figure out a way for me to stay in one place for these 4 years. And that may not sound like a big deal, but again, every single year, starting over, starting fresh in new situations. It was what I knew, so I adapted. But again, over time, you realize there's something about that lack of sense of belonging or always going, well, I don't want to get too close to anyone because I don't know how long you're really going to be in my life. So those are various things that occur. And there's a lot of stories in between. Another pivotal moment for me was, if you're hearing and listening to my story, you realize that my mom was home, right? She was the landing place in all things. Well, when I was in college, my mom was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. And so you're faced then, or I was faced with, do I want to stay at school or do I want to go home because I don't know what this looks like or how much time we have? And I'll pause there and just go, those are some of the stories that really add into my life. And then over time, really pushed me to go, how do I maintain the legacy that has been given to me? If I've had the opportunity to overcome these things and get to this place in life, whatever that is at the time, what am I doing with that time? What am I doing with that moment? But I'll pause and take a breath and then go on.
Um, Part of what I'm hearing, and I want to check it out with you, which explains to me how you started out with honoring this space. Because what you're describing is a space that was always shifting. And growing up, there wasn't really a space to honor because it was changing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all you knew. And every year you went from one space to another to another. And it sounds like where you're at now is, I mean, you may still have nightmares and things like that you're moving around, but it sounds like, gee, I'm in a relatively stable space. I'm not going to be plucked out in a year and land somewhere else. And I want to honor that I've arrived here and not take it for granted because it's something new and special. So is any of that accurate?
A lot of that is accurate. A lot of it. I'm here in a space that is much more stable than it used to be. But I'll even say when my husband and I first got married and started having children, we moved quite a bit, and it took us a moment to realize we were recreating that pattern. There were various reasons. We moved to a new environment and needed to make a change that was better for our family. But I remember us getting to the point where we were like, okay, this needs to be the last move for a moment so that our children, while they're young, can still experience what it's like to be in one place. So it's amazing now. My children are 21 and 23. They can come back to where we're located here in Charlotte, North Carolina, and they have memories and they have places that they can go, oh, you remember when we used to go here and when we used to do this? And it's actually through hearing their memories that I've been able to go, wow, I don't have those. There was so much change that people who knew me from my youth have more memories of me in places than I necessarily have. And then another moment in between the story that is the other big aspect of honoring the space is when my husband and I got married in 1998. So we're almost about to celebrate 25 years of marriage. But this was again right around the time that I'm graduating college, had a child. And so when my child was 9 months old, I went to go live with my mom and my father while my husband finished, my stepfather, who I call my father, while my husband finished college because we were told that she had less than a year to live. And I had my son on September 17th, late in the evening. And within 48 hours, my mom passed away. I was in room 414. She was in room 441. The way that hospital was set up, there was space in between oncology and the ward for birth, the birthing ward. And the level of emotion, I don't even know if there was an emotion between I just had a child and I just lost the only consistent anchor in that space. The only thing that went with me from space to space up until that point was my mom, and that was gone. And the bottom felt like it was falling out of my world. And yet I had to stay present because I'm married and a newlywed and I have two children. My daughter was only 20 months at that time. So I'm under 25, newly married, two small children, one a newborn. And I literally leave the hospital to go to the funeral home because one of my mom's requests was that I helped pick out her casket. And that was a pivotal moment and a much of when I say honoring the space you were designed to occupy is looking at what she accomplished. I remember her last 8 years living with cancer from the moment she got her diagnosis until she passed away. She was already doing so much in the community. I, at the time, was just like, whatever. I'm in high school slash college, not interested. That's my mom's thing. I never really connected to the value for me because I was in that season of life where that wasn't my focus. And then as she passed away, and I realized life can change instantly. She was only 53 years old when she was passed away. So that created the absolute most significant wake up call in my life in two areas. And one was never take a moment, a day, or an opportunity to touch people for granted, ever. And then two, it was a wake up call towards my health in needing to go, I need to find out more information, even though in our 20s, we don't often think about that, about what's in my genetic bloodline. She passed away of colon cancer that metastasized, which has a lot to do with, how we eat and early prevention. So those were two big pieces that I am consistently looking to go as I'm stable and as I'm healing and walking through different things. How do I honor that space, honor her legacy, and almost I'm not looking to continue the work that she did because we're very different people. but I am looking to build on the sacrifices that she made and realizing even now, I'm still learning from the time I did have with her. There's so many experiences and things that she said and journals that she left that I get to refer back to as my adult life because I've grown up and parented without a mother and technically without a biological father. And that's a very different journey than everyone, thankfully, experiences.
Now, have you written a book or do you have a book out?
I do. I wrote a book called Expired Mindsets Releasing Patterns That No Longer Serve You Well. And wasn't my intention to even integrate these pieces into the book, but I realized in order for me to help people understand my passion and my purpose behind alleviating the parts of you that are holding you back, they needed to know more about my origin story. So I tell in more detail the story of what happened that day with my father. I talk about the time frame around the loss of my mom. To give you a piece of context, I was at that time a school teacher in Frederick, Maryland, which is about 40 minutes north of Camp David. So this occurred on September 17th, 2001. So a week after 9/11 is when this all happened. 9/11, I'm a school teacher with students whose parents work at the Pentagon, stuck at school all day trying to let them know enough, but not too much, not really having all the information ourselves while also being 40 weeks pregnant. And everyone going, please don't go into labor while you're here. And then within a span of a week, also then birth a child and lose my mother at the same time. So I do kind of integrate that and talk about just all the juxtapositions behind what that's like to need to be strong, but also wondering how your other child is doing and knowing that your mom is losing her life. And I remember getting home that day and my mom's laying on the bed. I walk in, greet my 9, 10 month old. She may have been a little older. She would have been a little bit older by that point. And my mom says, you know, today hundreds of people lost their life and didn't know it. And she said, but I can lay here and say, I'm ready. And I've done everything I can within the time that I have. And that's just such a sobering statement. And I want to be able to say the same. I won't be able to say that my life was perfect and I did everything right, but I wanted to be able to say I took every opportunity that I could to heal and to help others heal or to help others have hope or feel encouraged or feel like they belong for however long they're in my space, whether that's a day, a brief encounter, a few years, or a lifetime.
Have you done a TED Talk yet?
I have not.
So I have a suggestion for you
Okay.
because this is how I kind of mentor people. As I'm listening to you with all these events, especially the event of the birth of your child and the death of your mom, if I was in an audience listening to you and the title of your talk was called, How Do I Process This? That'd be the title of your TED Talk.
Mm.
And it starts out with, just as you said, I was in this hospital where I was giving birth in, one floor, and not too far away was the rock of my life, my mom dying. Mm-hmm. And as I'm listening to that, I'm thinking, I have no idea how I would process that if that was me, but I would be riveted. So just a thought for you, because it's just a thought.
Yeah. Thought received. Thought received well.
And can you share how I think you've already shared a little bit, but how you did process it? And it's interesting, when I've heard that word I think it's never had the meaning to me that it has at this moment, because a lot of times you'll hear the word, I need to process that. And it sounds sometimes like psychobabble. Oh, you need to process that. But, and I never grasped the visceral feeling of it. But as you shared that incident and I was putting myself in your shoes, I'm thinking, what do I do with this? Plus I have responsibilities. I don't have the luxury of just sort of, going away in some retreat to find meaning in all this. And
Accurate.
I've got to juggle everything. And anyway, it's just a thought. And
Yeah.
I think it could be something that could be the leading edge of something that, could, the meaning that you could find from that, from the processing it,
Yeah.
is something that I think millions of people would want to know.
You use the word visceral, and that is very fitting to the situation. I remember being rolled in a wheelchair out of the hospital holding my newborn. And in that moment, my only goal was honestly not to feel. I didn't know which direction I could go. You know, even though I knew it was coming, there's nothing that still prepares you for that kind of a loss, and you don't expect it to come right on the edge of something so beautiful. So viscerally, I felt very still, very neutral. If we look at it in psychology, I was probably in freeze
Mm-hmm.
in some way of just let me hold here and put one foot in front of the other. Because in the back of my mind, I'm also thinking, I'm planning to nurse this child. So keeping my body calm,
Mm-hmm.
which is how I even got into the world of somatics, and your nervous system is necessary for me to be able to nurse and efficiently and effectively build my milk supply. And that can sound small, but that's a significant source of stress as a new parent if you're unable to do that. And it was hard. I used to tell people, when my mom leaves Earth, I want to go with her. And people would always go, don't say that. And I go, I'm serious. I really mean it. And I will often tell people, I absolutely believe that God knew I needed a newborn at that exact moment. After my first child, I had some complications and was actually told I would not be able to have more children. Was told it would be difficult for me to have my first one. So I was 20 weeks pregnant before I even knew I was pregnant with my son. So him, being conceived and the timing, he was a few days late. All of it now was so providential. And here's the difference why, in my opinion, my daughter was 21, 20 months at that time. Yes, I love my daughter with all of my heart, but she was just old enough that if I wanted to disappear, my husband could have taken the reins to some degree. Not so much with a newborn. Having a newborn and then also having a toddler forced me to stay present, to stay in life. So they were a big part of me knowing here's the next thing to do each moment, because that's what I can focus on. Thankfully, I had maternity leave, which gave me time to only focus on being a mom before then adding back in being a teacher. But processing the loss of the only person that has been reliable in your life is like a paradigm shift that you don't want. And learning what that now looks like, and can I still celebrate things that were meaningful to us without her? And if I don't, how does that impact my children? How does that impact my family? You shift your expectations. You know, your parents, if you have a good relationship with them, are the ones that you pick up the phone and they know by the sound of your hello whether you're okay or not. And so I thought about, well, who's going to know my hello, right? No one's going to be able to read me like that. I'm now going to even have to go through the effort of trying to over explain to everyone why I feel the way I am. And then, you know, as you grow, the processing actually doesn't stop. It's different with each season because there are seasons that you hit as a woman, as a businesswoman, as an entrepreneur, as a parent, a wife, and you don't have anybody to call back and go, when I was little, did I do this? Or what did you do when this happened? So I say that to go, allow yourself the space to know that processing is a continuation and you're going to have new seasons and new transitions. But in the beginning, I froze. My children, my husband helped me thaw out. They helped kind of swim underneath and kind of helped refocus me and recenter me. And then over time, it shifted to how can I turn this pain into something purposeful? Because if I've gotten through it, then there may be other people who can resonate in other small ways. And it gives me an opportunity to let them know I'm not just someone who went to school for 10 years to write a book, you know, with visions of grandeur, wasn't written, you know, but for financial means. I wanted the people who read the book to know I wrote it because I've lived what I'm trying to share and I'm adding story and knowledge with it to let you go. It's not just an opinion, but I've lived what I've put myself in the driver's seat first before I ask you to also come along the ride to learn, to grow, to change, to shift.
You know, this podcast is conversational. So often when guests bring up things, it'll remind me of a story. So you're reminding me of a story, and I'm going to share it with you. And then you can tell me, you know, and you can say, I have no idea what you're talking about, or I can understand that.
Okay.
Many years ago, one of my clients, her only child daughter was viciously murdered. I mean, viciously murdered, gory. And it was her only child. And her husband had other children. So she felt all alone with this. And I really didn't think I was helping her at all. And and I was able to get her into this gruesome group called Parents of Murdered Children. And the Los Angeles chapter was led by Sharon Tate's mother. So Sharon Tate was murdered by Charles Manson.
Yeah.
And I would occasionally go to the meetings and they would talk about, well, this is what happened. This is where we are in apprehending or prosecuting the murderer. And she didn't want to go. And I pushed her because I said, there is no place in this world that you can go where when you tell your game stopping, show stopping story, do you have any children, that you're not going to feel this incredible gap. And it's not even enough if the child, you know, died from leukemia or something. You have a special trauma. And this is what she taught me, because it saved her life. Because when she went there, new moms who had children murdered entered the group. So they would start to look at her like a mother figure. Mm-hmm. And she shared this interesting model. And the model was, she said, if you think of one of those trees that are cut that have hundreds of rings, like there's a famous place above San Francisco called Muir Woods. If you walk through the woods, you'll see these trees that have been cut and they're hundreds of years old. And she said, each ring is a year. and you can tell the history of that tree. One ring looks like there was a fire, one ring looks like there was a flood, and it tells you the character of the tree. And she said, what I realized is as long as I was just stuck, I was like a broken record playing over and over again in my head. And she said, what I realized is you have to build new memories to dilute the awful memory. So new memories are the next ring in the tree and the next ring and the next ring. And so that, yes, the ring where she lost her daughter was awful. But, you know, the next several rings where she was kind of adopted by some of these other mothers, she found a purpose in the community, you know, and some years ago, someone sent me something from UCLA that she had made a big donation to the trauma center and to UCLA, and I was quoted in it as, you know, someone who I guess helped her through it. So I don't know if that any of that fits for you, but she said, if you stay in your head, you can't build new memories to dilute the bad ones, and you got to push yourself. So does that make any sense to you?
It makes a lot of sense. I love trees. So I love the analogy of the rings. And, you know, we know, most of us know what that does mean for a tree and what that looks like. Yeah, those new memories are definitely a way, in my opinion, of balancing the scale, so to speak. You know, I remember my experiences as a mom and our connection and our relationship. So I've not only worked to build new memories, but I've looked at what her character was as a person, how she left people, how she was this very honest and direct person, but you also knew she was loving and empathetic, but don't ask her if you don't want to know the truth of what she thinks. And it was about, you know, or has been about making new memories, building on what she has poured into me. And, you know, dilute may not be the word that I would personally use, but I absolutely understand the connotation. I think for me, I want to see it more as a tapestry, something that feels interwoven and interconnected, where you can see, oh, this continues to maybe get a little wider, and I see all the colors, and you know, the colors in the string here look like it's older. Do they even make those colors anymore? No, they don't, but here's this newer version, but they all blend together to make this really powerful story. So it's creating the new memories to help balance the pain of the loss, but also giving myself permission to go, I'm allowed to bring that with me and weave it into everything that I do. I don't have to leave it in the past. The goal is not to forget it or distance myself from it, because it's a part of me. It is part of who I am. Yes, maybe I would be here in some ways if it wasn't for that moment, but I don't think it would look the same, which is why I bring the story to mind. Not every time, but it often fits in many ways and even ends up finding its way to the work that I do one-on-one with clients as they're sitting. And I'm able to distance the two, but there's a different level of insight when you've experienced certain things than when you're just working at it from empathy without being able to resonate.
I love that. And I love, you just helped me with something because uh, I like the rings metaphor, but I think you've really added something to it because my father died in 1995, and he could be fairly critical and demanding. And it was easy to sort of see that as a negative, but I think what caused him to be critical and demanding was, you know, the fear. Can I provide for this family? Am I going to be as good as the father next door? You know, am I going to be less than? And, you know, having had my own family and wondered if I could support them, wondered if I could raise them, I think it's given me an empathy of the fear underneath his negativity. I have a different mindset, so my fear doesn't come out as negativity. I turn it more inwardly and tend probably more towards depression rather than taking it out on anyone else. I'll just say, no, I'm fine. I'm fine, when I'm not fine. And so, but it was very helpful what you were saying, because there's a way we can reintegrate things that we thought of in a certain way, that as we get older, we can now look at it through different eyes, and maybe even look at it through the eyes of that person that we had a gap with, and bring them closer. So I want to thank you. I want to share something else that's coming up, and I want to see how it lands for you.
Okay.
There was a woman I was seeing who was very, very close to her father, the way you were to your mother. And she was his favorite, and he was quite well known. And he was her hero. And I remember after he died, she kept seeing me and saying, I don't know what I'm going to do. And then one day she came in and she had not a grin, but a smile. And she said, I think I've turned a corner. And I said, really? What do you mean? And she looked at me and she said, it just comes down to living with life never being the same again. I thought that was so eloquent. She said, my life isn't over. It'll just never be the same again because he's gone.
Yeah.
But I can still laugh. I can still have a relationship. I can get married. It'll never be the same again because he's not here, but it's not over. And when she said living with, it's like she exhaled, living with life never being the same again. So I wanted to share that with you because I thought it was just so eloquent.
Yeah, it's eloquent. It's simple yet profound. So profound to go, it will never be the same again, but I can still do all these things. Because I do believe that there is an element of just human nature where we're always trying to recreate something that we've had in the past, that we can believe that resolving grief means, oh, when I feel the way I used to feel when this person was alive, or when I get through this difficult situation and feel the way I did before, then I will be okay. But you've gone through the grief, you've gone through the challenge, you've gone through the difficult situation. We don't ever return to what we were, nor is that the desire. Or, I don't want to say nor should that be the desire, but I think it can be a counterproductive desire, because there's something about who we became because of that experience that informs the way we look at things, that informs our view and how we move through life. So if we go back, then we're just really discounting something very valuable. But I love the way that she said that and gave herself permission to go, it is not ever going to be the same. And not our choice for it to be that way, but it's an acceptance. That's what I hear in that statement. It's a place of acceptance. And then how do you move forward? And that's part of what I try to help people connect to. You've had things that are causing your record to play on loop and you to feel stuck. But at a certain point, you may want to decide to go, let me stop this, because the song is starting to make me feel sick. It's too much. And how can I move forward? Is it possible? And the answer is yes, but it's going to look different for each of us. So it's also going to take a lot of courage to go, one person's way of living with a difficult moment is going to look different than someone else's. And one is not better, or it's not a right or wrong, but find your way to move forward so that you don't miss out on the life that you have. I sometimes will, you know, think every moment that I have, especially now that I am just beyond the age she was when she was first diagnosed. I remember almost kind of holding my breath up until this point and going, will I follow in the same course? That's just a reaction I had to the significance of her loss so early. But it's constantly in my mind that every extra moment that I get is a gift because somebody else hasn't lived as long as I have, won't live past today. And it's not in a morbid way. That's not a sadness that I feel. It's not even an urgency. It is this beautiful appreciation that even on your most difficult day, something beautiful occurred. We just have to look forward. And I feel like when you know or have understanding that at some point those days are going to end, you're a little bit more willing to go, I don't want to miss the simplicity of today or the beauty of today or the funny moment in today to focus on the one thing that I can't control that happened today.
What I love about you is there's a quality in you of teaching as opposed to preaching. And I'm not against preaching, but there's this lived experience, wisdom that flows through you, and you're not running away from hurt.
Mhm.
You didn't know this, Charryse, but you just got a 2-for-1 on today's podcast because I co-host a weekly radio show on UK Health Radio. So it's a weekly internet radio show. And the title of the show is Hurt Less, Live More. And the idea, and we have guests on, and you're going to be on that show,
Oh,
is
thank you.
we talk to people because, and you'll understand why I'm saying what I'm saying. I have a co-host, a Scottish journalist and reporter, and our belief is that the world is engaged in running away from hurt and fear into coping mechanisms that help them survive for the moment. But when those coping mechanisms add up, be it drinking, eating, other addictions, video games, being angry at the people they love, those coping mechanisms add up and make your life worse. So our view is, if we can introduce to the world, if you feel hurt or afraid, before you run or react to them, you can feel them.
Mhm. Yeah.
Instead of fearing them. And when you can feel them in the presence of someone who doesn't get scared and doesn't rush you, what are you going to do with it? Oh, well, maybe you should do such and such. Maybe you should leave.
Yes.
But when someone can create space the way you create space, there's something very calming if you can just, before you decide how to deal with it, you let yourself feel it, and it just runs through you. So I hope you'll accept the invitation to be a guest on our show.
Yeah, I would love to. I didn't even know it was a 2-for-1 today, but I'll take it for sure. And I agree with that premise. And we weren't taught what to do with hurt and pain. We'd rather not experience it. My hope is, whether I'm sharing with a friend or sharing on platforms like this, that we move in a place or towards a place where we see that hurt as a messenger. And even though it feels really awful, if I can sit with it and tolerate it for a moment, it's trying to tell me something. Anxiety, depression, that depressed state is a sign of overwhelm. And for many of us, if we didn't have those markers of hurt, we wouldn't handle anything in our lives. We'd be chaotic and go a million miles per hour. And a wake up call wouldn't exist because we wouldn't listen to anything. So we need those knee pains and those headaches and those chest pains to go, wait, what's wrong? Something's not right. So when we can learn to listen to the message, and then I'm a proponent of then make an adjustment, because usually there's a recipe to what kind of adds to our pain. And if we can learn, oh, this is how I'm wired because of my story. So I know that if I go into this environment, I can exist here for a little while, but this is what I'm going to need after I get out of that environment so that I can move back to a place that feels more balanced, learning to work with who we are. But that's the whole premise, is if I'm disconnected from all those past experiences that are unresolved because I've avoided them and pushed them away through addiction, through being busy, overworking, because we can do really good things as coping skills as well, taking care of other people instead of taking care of ourselves, then I'm disconnected from what I really need. And then that keeps us in the pattern of, how do I keep getting back here? Why does this always happen to me? So we have to listen. And yes, it's hard, but it's worth it.
So scrap the other TED Talk. I have a new title for you. Allowing wisdom. Because as I listen to you, and again, you have no idea how much you're teaching me and inspiring our audience by not running from the hurt and having a certain faith that there's something in the hurt that is trying to teach you something. And you may not know what it is immediately. And if you run from it, you'll never know what it is. But it's as if you've sat with, and I'm not saying ruminated, you might have done a little of that because we all do, but you've sat with something and it's allowed a certain wisdom that was in you to come out. And because there's a lived life wisdom that you have. I mean, everything you say, it's not a sales pitch. It's just eloquent. And maybe you can immerse yourself in that, because allowing wisdom is not a bad meme.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I know my process, right? But I don't know that I've ever heard anyone reflect it back, in a way that shows the depth and the breadth of it. Because to me, this is who I am. I talk like this all the time, right? No matter what, to my kids, to my friends, to my family. But I will say I have had so much hurt so quickly that it did force me to learn how to process versus avoid. And I had older siblings who I watched use avoidance coping skills. And that was enough to let me know, no thanks. That's not helpful. So I try to focus more on, I don't know what's going to happen. And I cannot control everything that will or won't attempt to hurt or does hurt. But I do get to choose how I respond. I do get to choose what I need in order to move through that situation. And I get to choose whether or not I allow that situation to change me. So honoring my space and what I'm designed to be also means I can let the dominoes of stories, turn me into a hard, negative, critical, mad, angry, entitled person, or I can go, wouldn't have chose that, wouldn't have chose that, wouldn't have chose that, but I did choose this, and I chose this instead. And despite all of it, I still love. I can still look at a situation and see, yes, you were not a nice person, but you are a nice person. You weren't in this moment. And I feel like that helps me when I connect with people. I don't over respond when they share something that they may feel really awful about. I go, okay, it was a moment. What'd you learn from it? What would you do different? We don't have to hold ourselves hostage because of the past or not knowing how to move through, but we have responsibility. We have an opportunity. We do have to make choices around, now that I have this information, now that I recognize my own patterns of self sabotage, am I willing to do something about them, or do I want to just stay in the middle of my misery?
Can you unpack a little bit about something that too few people get, which is no matter what happens to you or life throws at you, you may feel that you don't get to choose, but you always get to choose.
Yeah,
Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think that's so valuable to our listeners.
yeah. A lot of times when things happen in life, we have a tendency to focus on the pieces that we want to control. And I believe control is a myth because there's way too many variables. And we focus on things that we don't have a choice over. If I'm in a relationship or connection with another person and they are angry, I didn't necessarily cause that anger, don't know all of what they're experiencing. And we can get caught in really negative adapting skills by internalizing that person's anger and thinking, well, it's my fault. I wasn't enough. If I would have done this better, because that's how it feels. You want to get out of that situation. But the hope is that we begin to learn there's a way, and this is just an analogy, to create what I like to call an invisible force field around ourselves, which means I'm very aware of what's happening and what's coming in my direction. But there is this learned and practiced ability to go, but I do not have to allow it to absorb. I can put space between their anger and my reality and go, this is an individual who is often angry, and I am not the cause of their anger. And so instead of internalizing or thinking that it's my fault or learning to please in order to keep the peace, I can put up boundaries as possible. I can really consider how much connection can I have with this person. But the other piece that we have to choose is, if anger and hurt is what's coming at me, what do I need as the counterbalance in order to offset that? I need to speak to myself through a lens of compassion. I need to encourage myself. I need to be in spaces or reading things or listening to things that speak to who I am as a human, so that there's a message that balances what I'm getting from that one source. But often we won't do that work on ourselves because we believe that alleviating our hurt is, what can I do to get them to stop? Not realizing they'll move on, they'll be out of your life, and you're still carrying, I'm not good enough. I made a person upset. They didn't talk to me today at work. And because this person didn't talk to me growing up, now I feel the same way about my manager who might just be tired. And so that's how we don't recognize parts of our story and choosing to believe them and take them as truth of our identity keeps us from going, I get to choose what I believe about myself. And there's a balance to that. We want to go, okay, what was my part? Was there a part? Did I say things? Did I speak in a manner that added fuel to the fire? But then there's a balance to going, we don't fully operate in the level of choice that we have, because sometimes the choices that we need to make are uncomfortable. So again, it's that avoidance aspect, and we take the storm and we turn it in.
Yeah, you're reminding me. I heard an interesting approach to setting a boundary when someone is coming at you and they're threatening or they're making excuses. And what this person would say is um, simply, "I understand," or and so. Not in a passive aggressive way. You hear this, and so, and then often the more manipulative the person, the more they'll trigger saying something. Well, I'm going to do blah 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 blah, and then what this person would do is hear that and just merely said, "Well, I hope you won't." Well, I'm going to be. Well, I hope you won't. And it was said with kindness. But it's amazing how there are people who will try to hook us and make their problem our fault and our responsibility, and trigger guilt and shame, and I'm not good enough, and maybe I don't care about them enough. And I think we have to be a little more self-protective with those people. We need to be understanding, but
Like
interesting.
self-protective for
Yeah.
sure. And it's hard. And I feel like people who are like that have this knack for finding kind-hearted people. My daughter is similar to what you described, just loves the world. And why would someone be manipulative or not nice? And, she's learning, but it's been a hard lesson for her to separate from, well, you didn't do what I wanted, so now I'm going to do this, and her not think, is it because I didn't do what they wanted, or no, that was their choice, and they likely would have made that choice regardless. But each of our temperaments, right, are very different and unique, and that's where understanding ourselves is just a key aspect of knowing then. And she's learning this as a young adult. You will have to be more cautious around the people that are close to you, because your heart is that way and you are so connected to individuals. And even, you know, my story compared to her story, that's something that I've had to learn, because in my mind, I was like, how is she my child falling for this? Right. And then I go, wait, trauma taught me these things. She didn't grow up in the same level of experiences. So she is much more open, and I won't say that she's not resilient, but her resilience is being formed in a very different way than mine. So I even think we have to recognize how the way we do or don't put boundaries in place or work through things also impacts the way we treat other people or the expectations that we place on other people.
Look, I'm a lot older than your daughter. I'm a lot older than you, and I had the same issues as your daughter. And one of the reasons is, look, I was a therapist for many years. I'm retired, and I didn't like the quality of being judgmental. I had a judgmental parent, and and I felt, how that can be painful. So anytime someone was acting up that might trigger me being judgmental, it would neutralize me. It would neuter me, because I'm being judgmental, I have to do the opposite. And so often I would give in. And something that I've discovered in the last 15 years is I'm discerning. And discerning's a nice word.
It is.
Whereas judgmental makes me feel I'm a bad person. I'm not accepting. I'm not loving. I'm blah 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 blah. But I'm allowing myself to be discerning, and I can't use the word selective because that sounds a little bit like judgmental and arrogant, but I'm using the word, I'm allowing myself to be discerning and choosing, what to do.
Mhm.
And you might share that with your daughter because
Yes.
I wish I'd learned that 60 years ago. So where can people find out more about you? You've been an utter delight, and I'm going to get a second helping of you on
I love
UK
it.
Health Radio.
I'm looking forward to it. People can find out about me by going to www.drcharryse.com, and Charryse is spelled Charryse. And typically, you Google that, it's going to pull up all the good stuff. I'm also on Instagram at Dr.Charryse_J.
You've been terrific. This has been, I want to thank you for our listeners, and I want to thank you for me.
Thank you for having me. This has been like a breath of fresh air, and I'm honored to sit and just talk.
Well, you've honored all of us. And thank you to our listeners. If you're listening in, do share this episode with people people that are highly reactive, people that need to learn how to pause, and people who you can't get to pause because when you tell them to pause, you sound judgmental and you're aggravated because you are. But Dr. Charryse has just been wonderful in just sharing a way of being with your own reactivity, with the reactivity of others. And all of us can learn a lot from her. So do follow up with her. And thank you for tuning in. And please share this with other people that you think would like to have a little bit of wisdom in their life. And we'll see you again. And when wake up calls come your way, don't ignore them. Wake up and try not to react. Take care, everyone.